Hello and welcome to The Bottom Line on TVP World. This is where we break down some of the main business and economic stories of the day. I'm your host, Marie Cato. Today, the EU Commission announced a support package for the European steel industry in response to the challenges it faces both here and from across the Atlantic. And these are numerous, as our reporter Jan Kennedy will tell us in his feature.
European furnaces continue to churn out high-quality red-hot steel. However, in recent years, the competitive edge of the EU-made commodity has begun to fade.
The restrictions and burdens imposed on us by the European Union due to the Green Deal policies, along with soaring electricity and gas prices, and most notably, the cost of ETS certificates have led to a loss of competitiveness compared to third countries.
While production in some countries, including Poland, showed a slight recovery last year, the overall situation remains underwhelming.
We witnessed in Poland the lowest possible level of steel production for decades. However, in 2024, steel production increased slightly to more than 7 million tons, which might be a positive signal that steel industry in Poland is somehow recovering.
But starting next month, steel producers from the EU and beyond will be exposed to an additional blow.
Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
While EU steel exports to the US are relatively small, around 4 million tons per year, the ripple effects could have broader impact.
Donald Trump imposed tariffs on steel worldwide, not just on the European Union. Countries that were previously exporting to the US, such as Turkey, India, South Korea and Japan, now face restricted access to the US market. These countries will look for alternative markets, and the European Union will be a primary target.
Amid the industry's challenges, especially at a time of growing global geopolitical uncertainty, the EU Commission has vowed to take action.
Steel is becoming a strategic sector for us that must be defended. We will try with our tools, and I think it is reasonable for the European Commission to follow international rules.
The Commission has announced measures to protect local producers, including tightening import controls to ensure sure compliance with the EU's green regulations. These efforts coincide with the EU's goal to produce steel in an environmentally sustainable way. With nearly 2 billion tons of steel produced globally each year, steel production accounts for 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions, more than the entire EU bloc.
The decarbonization won't be cheap in the initial stage, but as the European Union, we are a great economy which could pave the way for decarbonization of steel industry all over the world.
According to calculations by the energy think tank Instrat, this could double production costs, but should be pursued nonetheless.
1 ton of steel can be more expensive by €400 by 2040 if this vehicle is made with green steel. However, so we can see that the cost of a passenger vehicle would be higher by €400.
In addition to European efforts, the Polish government is also working on measures meant to support the local steel industry. The question remains whether it will be enough to overcome the industry's harsh realities.
So as we just heard in the feature, the question remains whether all this support will be enough to overcome the industry's harsh realities. And to answer this question, we are now joined by Mirosław Motyka, CEO of the Polish Steel Association. Hello, and thank you very much for joining us in the studio.
Hello.
So, as we heard in the feature, the industry faces numerous challenges, but it soldiers on. So please tell us, is steelmaking a good business in Poland? Or not?
Poland?
Yes. Is it working for Poland?
Steel, let's say, this is the cornerstone and the enabler of all industrial processes. It started with steel, where we are together, the civilization, railways, cars, buildings, and we'll not stop there. The new revolution, whatever we call it, climate-friendly, new processes, the clean tech, as they call it, EU-wide, all starts with steel, whether it's made with steel or it's made of steel. So the steel will be consumed, not just in Poland, a country which is still developing. We are one of the fewest countries in the world where steel is consumed and it's growing, not plateauing, after we reach the level of more than 10,000 US dollars per capita. This is one of the benchmarks. At that level, the steel consumption should stabilize and then slowly go down, not in Poland. The problem is in Polish case that the steel is consumed, but the steel consumption, the steel market is not fully covered or supplied by Polish steel producers. And one of the reasons of this is a European-wide problem, which is electricity price. Not just electricity, but also energy price. In terms vis-à-vis Europe, Poland has higher energy price than our neighbors, like Germany or Czech Republic, but Europe as a whole has to pay for energy carriers more than any other countries. More than in the United States, who are now starting another trade war, or more in China or India. The reasons are different, right, for each case. But one of the major reasons for Europe, where we have to pay so much for energy carriers, is we don't have natural resources which could drive this growth, except for renewables, which is growing and it's very good, because the expected price decrease, and it is really to materialize soon, but the benefits of this do not come to energy-intensive industries as steel is. So you said European support. We have a lot of documents and programs and plans flying around, but we need concrete actions which come from these papers.
Absolutely, but we'll get to that in a moment. I want you to tell us about Europe. How does the steelmaking business look like in Europe? Is it worthwhile, the effort?
First of all, steel is not just steel. Let's use the so-called multiplier. One steel job creates 8 steel jobs elsewhere. So we are interconnected. We are part of the greater social and industrial fabric. Car makers, machine makers, these are all interconnected. So when we go down, they go down. When they go down, we go down. So Europe, over the last 10 years, lost more than 30 million tons of capacity and production. From net exporter of steel, Europe became net importer of steel, although the consumption is there. And the steel consuming sectors are there. So the question is why it came about to be. And the answer could be that there is no level playing field. A lot of is spoken about fair competition, or even the word competition, and market, fair market, free market. That's no longer the case. I'm sorry, we don't have to, we are competing on unequal terms with suppliers which don't use the same principles. We heard about rules. The rules-based economy, that's the past. So we have to adapt. Steel is very famous for adapting. But we, even without the support, but real, financial, regulatory, and other concrete measures, will not survive. The Poland in case, last year, which was the second worst year after the World War II, the second worst. Also in Europe, a lot of capacities were closed down or idled. And in Poland, almost 4,000 people had to go. There were some facilities idled, and most notably, the tube makers, at least 3 tube makers had to shut down and were wound down. So this is a pity. Why? They produce tubes and pipes. We need them for gas pipes.
For everything.
For everything.
Yeah.
Infrastructure. And who buys them? The state, right? The government, the local governments. So they are driven and led by so-called public procurement. And this public procurement is unfortunately failing. Where we, as steel industry, and to tell the truth, the other energy-intensive industry, have to bear the burden of new regulatory obligations. It's not only that we obey and comply. We have to install machines like filters, and we have to instruct people, etc., etc. It costs. And on the one hand, the public procurement says price decides, while we say no. there should be also other categories which should take into account, not just strict financials, but also environment, climate, and social rules we have to apply and monitor and implement.
Okay, well, I want to ask your opinion about the action plan that came out today.
Yeah.
The action plan on steels and metals that came out of the European Commission. It seems a little bit underwhelming, but you're the experts. And what do you make of it?
There's a very good that the recognition is there. Not only this for steel, it's one of the few sectors which have their own plan. Automotive, steel, chemicals. We are the second, so good. And the recognition comes not too soon, right? But I also have fears that it may be too late. There are very good proposals which are there, and it means just they were listening to us, because that was not a one-day process. We've been calling for such measures for more than 10 years.
So which of those proposals do you think was the most important and will be the most effective, perhaps?
As we always call it, to have the level playing field, right? Because this is not about that some guys are more competitive than ours or produce cheaper than we do. No, it's about regulatory framework and political and dimension. So we have to protect the borders and provide this kind of protection. We are flooded with steel, not because they are better or cheaper, but because they are sponsored. This is a state-sponsored exports, right? So we cannot compete with them. When somebody has deep pockets, and China is not the only one, which is here the culprit, but trade protection using the instruments which are in place now are not enough. So the proposals which they listen to us, and I hope that they will be implemented very soon, are like the continued global instrument which would replace safeguards. Safeguards is a kind of an instrument which protects you against all countries and all goods. So this is very good, very comprehensive instrument. Secondly, they want to make tighter the so-called CBAM, or which is another instrument which is not like trade instrument, but climate instrument. So to put us at the same footing, or the others at the same footing as we are in Europe in terms of climate protection and climate expenses. And this instrument would be hermetized to include more downstream products. So if you don't sell steel to Europe or to Poland because you are kind of protected, then those clever guys will use steel-containing products like cars, wind towers to circumvent this measure and go there. So that was also recognized, and the work will start soon on having this, and also to so-called resource reshuffling, very difficult word, but there's also a trick that could be used by steel importers to circumvent or not to pay what they have to pay, because we have two, say, technologies in steel making. One is less pollutant, less climate friendly, the other is more climate friendly. And if you have both, you could say those more climate friendly, you deliver to Europe. Those not, you deliver to my country. So the climate sense is not achieved here, right? Because the pollution, which is greater there, will stay the same or even worse, even if you shut down all those assets in Europe.
So you find the plan quite promising. Which of those proposals do you think is the most important?
The trade measures, because they are short-term and have to be introduced. The scrap protection, the scrap is also one of the climate-friendly, energy-saving material, which was deemed to be so important that during the former term of the European Commission, it was on the so-called critical or strategic list. It fell down because of its nature, but I think the talks are on the right track to have it also treated as strategic. So it should stay in Europe, should stay in Poland, rather than being exported, because we don't have iron ore, not much, right?
I want to talk about some domestic measures to help the industry. So at the start of the year, the Polish Ministry of Industry announced that it was putting together a broader package to support Poland's steel industry. But it looks like it takes some time before it comes together. But in the meantime, it's March. The geopolitical landscape has changed quite a bit. There's more urgency. Do you have any more details about when it might be ready and what it might actually entail?
Actually, we are part of this process.
Oh, okay. So tell us more.
And say not just part, but I think we started this process because we always wanted and appealed to European authorities to have something in place. 10 years back, that was a Tajani plan, right? But nobody quite remembers what was that. And now, because of this geopolitical dimension, and let's say it, trade wars, right? And regular wars, just at our border. So steel is not just strategic for infrastructure, but also for defense. In autumn last year, Germany introduced and opened their own steel action plan. So we said, let's do it the same for Poland. And we approached the ministry, and we have it since it was on the 3rd of January this year. The paper, the official document was issued, and we are part of the process. Next week, we are going to have the final, I would say, draft of this document. And the postulates or the demands are quite the same as in this Séjourné's document, the Metals Action Plan, because we share the same challenges and problems across Europe. But Poland has some specificities which we want to address in this document, and I want to tell. One of them is the so-called the quality fee, which is charged with your electricity bill, and we want to have them cut down for industrial or energy intensive industries. It's not maybe much, but because we are in a difficult situation, we want every penny to keep us afloat. The cash is now badly needed before we even start about decarbonization, which we are committed to. But first, let us tide over. We have to get there, even through smaller steps like this. And there's also this indirect compensation for CO2 costs in energy bills. We want to have this earlier than normally is the case, which is in autumn. We want, and it was the case during COVID time, when it was paid earlier. 6 months, when you have a credit, don't wait 6 months longer. That's really a big issue. And we don't want to hear that there are some administrative burdens or the people are understaffed. No, these are billions. These are billions at stake, and a lot of thousands of people which are also at stake.
Absolutely. Just as we wrap up, defense, you bring up defense, but among them, European countries, they want to get on with new tanks and rockets. This is good news for the industry. Do you think that the overall European demand for defense and that focus on defense will actually kickstart the Polish industry?
Let's do it, because defense, at the moment I heard there's a figure which say that 80% of equipment and the hardware, defense hardware, is coming from abroad, which we import to Europe. So let's change this.
And get the steel industry going.
Also because a lot of steel goes into tanks and just the roads and infrastructure, which is needed for the war effort, let's say it. So that could be really a boost for the economy at large and for Polish steelmakers. But we have also to rebuild the specific steel industry, which is not, we don't have, we used to have, or we still don't have, or not enough, the specialty steel which are needed for armors and for special equipment.
But it sounds like you're behind rebuilding it.
Yeah, we are there. We keep talking, we are alerting, but let's go to the concrete measures.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but Mirosław Motyka, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
And we were joined by Mirosław Motyka, CEO of the Polish Steel Association. Thank you for being with us today. I was your host, Marie Cato. Join us every weekday afternoon for The Bottom Line at 5:10 CT on TVP World. And for the latest in regional business, follow us on X and on tvpworld.com. And for more news and analysis, stay with us on TVP World. Goodbye.